Our first talk of the day will be from our keynote speaker, Nakshathra. She's a cyber criminologist, and she'll be talking about the multidisciplinary nature of cybersecurity, building different perspectives, and the security mindset. And she'll be talking about these topics through the lens of curiosity. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Nakshathra.
So, cybersecurity is not a technology problem. And I'll say that again because it might sound weird or wrong, especially given the way that we've all gathered here today. But cybersecurity, the field that I've spent the last few years working in, is not at its core a technology problem. Now, I'm not saying technology doesn't matter. It does. The technical skills matter. But if you look at the biggest and most consequential security failures of the last decade, the ones that have cost billions and affected millions of real people, almost none of them happened because the technology failed. They happened because of a password saved in the wrong place, a warning that nobody acted on, a startup that built the wrong product, and then the real world showed up. And that is genuinely the most honest thing that I can tell you, because if this was purely a technical problem, this room would look very different. There would be one type of person in it, one background, and one kind of degree. But it isn't. I am a cyber criminologist. At the age of 27, I built this university and Australia's first criminology-backed cybersecurity course. I sit at the intersection of human behavior, crime, and technology. I didn't arrive here through a computer science degree. I arrived here through questions about why systems that are supposed to protect people so often don't, about who gets left out, and about what's hiding underneath the surface. Those questions took me somewhere I didn't expect. I'm going to tell you two stories today, and I've kind of set it up already, but they're set a decade apart on opposite sides of the world. But they're really the same story, and by the end, I think you'll see exactly what connects them and what it means for you. So, Medibank Private is one of Australia's largest health insurers. Nearly 4 million customers, decades of sensitive medical data, diagnoses, Medicare numbers, mental health records, etc. The kind of information that people share with a doctor trusting it will never leave that room. But in October 2022, it left the room. Let me walk you through what happened. Sometime before August 2022, a third-party contractor working for one of Medibank's service desk providers was given administrator-level credentials, access to most of Medibank's internal systems. It meant that a single individual using a single set of credentials effectively held access to almost every critical system within the organization. That contractor saved his Medibank username and password to his personal browser on his work computer. When he later signed in on that same browser profile at home, the credentials synced across automatically. His home computer was infected with malware. The credentials were stolen, and a Russian cybercrime forum put it up for sale. A buyer purchased them, logged in, and quietly and methodically started extracting data. Now, I want to pause here because I know the instinct when you hear he saved his password on a personal device is, oh my God, how avoidable, he shouldn't have done that. But I want to push back on that gently because the reaction itself is part of the problem. Saving a work login to a browser is not a reckless act. I do it, you do it, it's an ordinary act. It's one that millions of people perform every single day. The system assumed that they wouldn't, but they did. And that is the gap between the user that the design is imagined and the user who actually exists. Medibank giving that contractor admin access to almost every system was a policy decision. It was made by people in a meeting room. It was not a technical failure, it was a human one. And the VPN that the contractor used, there was no multi-factor authentication. In 2020, an audit had occurred that flagged this with Medibank, and they were told they just didn't do anything about it. Organizational psychologists have a name for what happened next: normalization of deviance, the slow or quiet process by which a known risk becomes acceptable as tolerable, because nothing catastrophic has actually happened yet. The warning was real, nothing went wrong, time had passed, and the urgency dissolved into the background noise of a very large organization that solves very real problems every single day. until October 2022, when it stopped being background noise. Medibank's own security software generated alerts in August. Accurate alerts, it was sent to a security operations email address, but it wasn't escalated and it wasn't acted upon. Behavioral scientists call this alert fatigue. What happens when human attention is subjected to a constant stream of warnings, most of which turn out to be nothing? The brain adapts, it learns to discount them, not because the people are incompetent, but because they're human, and that's what human attention does under sustained overload. The ransomware attackers had undetected access for over a month. 520 gigabytes of data were exfiltrated, 9.7 million Australians' most sensitive health information. Medibank refused to pay the $10 million ransom. The hackers responded by publishing the data on the dark web, files labelled the good list and the naughty list. Records of people who had sought out help for HIV, addiction, eating disorders, mental health conditions, and abortion records. These were real people with real medical histories, and their most private information was deliberately released as a weapon to cause fear, humiliation, and harm. Australia's Information Commissioner in federal court proceedings against Medibank was direct. This was not a sophisticated or an unforeseeable attack. It was a failure to take reasonable steps commensurate with the scale of how large this organisation was and the sensitivity of the data that it held onto. Here's what I want you to hold on to. A psychologist could have spotted the alert fatigue pattern before it became catastrophic. An organisational behaviourist could have seen the normalisation of deviance building in the culture around 2020, around that audit. A policy analyst could have pushed harder on the MFA defect. And a criminologist, like myself, could have mapped exactly the kind of third-party credential exposure that criminal markets specifically look for and exploit. None of them needed to know how to write a single line of code. They just needed to ask the right questions and be in the room. In the room. I want to stay with that idea of being in the room, as you all are right now, but it becomes even more important as we move on to the second story. The absence of the right questions from the right perspectives in the rooms where decisions were made. Medibank's failure was cultural and organisational. The technology flagged the problem, the humans couldn't respond, because the systems they operated inside weren't built with enough understanding with how actually real people behave. Now, my second story is smaller in scale, but in some ways it's the sharper illustration, because it shows how a single moment of human ambiguity can have consequences completely out of proportion to its size. In March 2016, during the United States presidential election campaign, John Podesta, our friend over here, is Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. He receives an email that looks like a security alert from Google. Someone in Ukraine has tried to access his account. The email says, "Change your password immediately, click here." His chief of staff forwards it to the campaign's IT help desk with one question: is this real? The IT staffer, Charles Delavan, replies. He means to write, "This is an illegitimate email." He types, "This is a legitimate email." Podesta clicks the link, enters his credentials into a fake login page, and 50,000 emails, his entire archive, are exfiltrated by Russian military intelligence and handed to WikiLeaks, who published them in the weeks before the election. The difference between success and failure in this case came down to a single word that was written incorrectly. Now, Charles Delavan is not the villain of this story. He's a person who made a mistake under time pressure, in a fast-moving environment, in a role that was almost certainly under-resourced. That's not a character failure, that's a system failure. The system placed a single point of human judgment between a convincing phishing email and a presidential campaign's entire correspondence. It wasn't built to be robust. But here's what I really want you to notice. The attacker didn't break into a server. The technique, which is a fake login page and a credential harvest, had existed for about 20 years at that point. What made it work wasn't technical sophistication. It was an understanding of how a busy person reads an urgent security notice. What happens to critical thinking when authority and time pressure arrive simultaneously, and how the desire to be helpful becomes, in the right circumstances, a vulnerability. These are not technology questions. These are people questions. They sit in the same body of research that us as social scientists have been building for decades. All we needed to look at was it differently. Let me show you what looking at it differently actually looks like in practice. So psychology and behavioral science, we've seen this in both stories. Cybersecurity keeps rediscovering them. The smarter approach is to bring psychologists into security design before the system is built, not after the breach happens. Forensic linguists are already working inside cybercrime investigations. When law enforcement or threat intelligence analysts try to attribute an attack to link an anonymous message or a piece of malware to a specific person or group, forensic linguists use authorship analysis. They examine vocabulary, grammatical structures, spelling patterns, even the errors someone makes, which often reveal their native language or their regional background. Theatre and the performing arts, funnily enough, are being applied to cybersecurity education, and the research is starting to show why it works. So people are doing interactive theatre programs designed to teach scam prevention. Actors simulate fraud scenarios live with audiences, and the findings show that theatrical simulation creates the kind of emotional recognition and behavioral understanding that a slide deck or a compliance module simply does not produce. Sociology and social anthropology bring something different: an understanding of how communities of harm sustain themselves. So how do ransomware gangs build internal trust among people with every reason to betray each other? How do criminal forums develop reputation systems without legal enforcement? And these are the same questions that anthropologists and sociologists ask about any community, not just cyber communities. The answers tell you not just how these networks function, but where they're genuinely vulnerable to disruption. Law and policy shape the environment in which every attack and every defense occurs. The gaps in cybercrime legislation, the places where enforcement is structurally impossible across jurisdictions, are not accidents. Criminal networks deliberately structure themselves to inhabit those gaps. Legal scholars and policy analysts who understand them are doing the security work. It's just not always called that. And design and the visual arts. So most people's first line of defense against a cyber attack is an interface, a button, a warning message, a different color. Whether someone pauses and reads carefully or clicks straight through, that is designed by visual hierarchy, language, and friction. Designers who understand how attention works, in particular dark patterns, and how trust is communicated visually, how urgency can be engineered into an experience, they're building security features whether or not anyone has actually described it to them that way. None of these people were waiting for permission to contribute. They just followed a question into a space where it turned out to matter. And I want to be honest about my own path here, because you're probably sitting there being like, why are you telling me this? It is too early for me to be even speaking about any of this. In your career path, I do not want to be here. I want to get to my workshops and my talks. A lot of you might be technical, and the reason I'm saying this is because I don't want to present my highlight reel. I came to this field through criminology, and it was a very unconventional path. And when I first arrived, I spent a lot of energy trying to speak the technical language, trying to prove that I belonged by demonstrating I could mimic a skill set I hadn't actually trained in. What I eventually realized, and what I wish someone told me earlier, is that the most valuable thing that I brought was not that. It was not my resume, it was not my skill set. It was the questions that I was asking that nobody else in the room was asking. Questions that came directly from what I learned after critiquing the system for so long in criminology. From years of thinking about why systems fail to protect people. From my own research into my thesis in cyberstalking in Australia, to experience of online harm that made me more motivated, to speaking all over the world about why innovation, cyber safety, and social sciences go hand in hand. And to representing Australian global forums and speaking about why digital literacy is a fundamental human right. I spent years working for the federal government straight out of graduating from the University of New South Wales, only to realise that my voice only mattered and existed in spaces where I spoke up for myself. And I want to say this directly to anyone in this room who has felt or feels like there might not be quite a version of themselves or a version of themselves in this field. In particular, I want to point out the women, the people of colour, and the students who might have taken an unconventional path. Everyone who arrived through a door that doesn't have cybersecurity written on it. Your background is not a detour. It's not something you need to apologise for or work around. The questions you ask because where you've come from, the users you think to include, the assumptions you notice because you've stood on the other side, that is the work. That is exactly what this field keeps failing to do. You don't have to wait until you feel qualified enough to start contributing, and this is something that I tell my students all the time. Question the system now. You are at probably the most powerful right now than entering a corporate organization. You can start with questions you're already asking. The genuine, persistent need to understand how something works or why something works, and whether it can be made safer for the people that are using it. That same drive and that same refusal to take a system at face value is what this discipline needs. It's what we need to address this gap. Because the world that the system was designed for and the world that actually exists, the warning that was generated and the human capacity to actually hear it, and the attack that was technically simple and the human environment that made it devastatingly effective are all very different worlds. The gap between the system and the world as we live, that is the gap in which cybersecurity happens, where it fails and where it succeeds. And closing that gap has never required just one kind of mind. Today, at the UNSW Security Society Students Security Conference, SCONES, I want to congratulate the Society for putting this together. This event exists because you understood that building a community across disciplines isn't just a nice idea. It is a gap that needs to be addressed. The problems that keep failing to get solved are the ones that keep being handed to the same kinds of people. So this is the idea that I want to leave you with. Find the question that will not leave you alone and follow it. Into this field, or across it, or through it, wherever it takes you. Whether you are technical or non-technical, I want you to fight the system. Critique everything. Don't wait until you feel ready, because that's not how this works. Curiosity doesn't wait for readiness. You just have to launch yourself into the unknown. And when you're sitting somewhere 6 months or 6 years from now asking a question that the person next to you didn't even think to ask, remember that that question could just be the difference between a failure and a success, between saving someone's life and harming someone's life. It may be the reason you're exactly where you need to be. Thank you very much for having me. All the best, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.